Number 8. Rebekah Mellon. Rebekah Mellon shot her husband Donald in Phoenix, Arizona on July 31, 2012. Afterward, she sat on their living room couch and smoked a cigarette as she watched him bleed to death. Shockingly, the couple's home surveillance camera caught the whole thing on video. Chilling footage shows Donald crawling into frame covered in blood. He then lifts himself off the floor and onto the couch while his wife just watches him struggle. 6 minutes after he climbed onto the sofa, Rebekah called the police. Sadly, if medical examiners had gotten to Donald sooner, he'd be alive, but that wasn't the case. Before the video was made public, the defense was going to plead guilty to charges of manslaughter, which would have resulted in 7 to 10 years in prison. They planned to use the fact that Rebekah suffered years of domestic abuse at the hands of her husband as the reason for the murder. But once the Maricopa County Supreme Court judge saw the footage, she told Rebekah to accept a plea bargain. The judge explained that jurors who watch the video won't see a domestic abuse victim, they'll see a killer who sat there patiently watching her husband die. Rebekah told the police her husband was always jealous and that he controlled her whole world. She claimed he'd choked her, hit her, and had thrown her to the ground multiple times. Donald was arrested twice on assault charges, and after his second arrest, Rebekah told officers that she was scared he was going to kill her. She claimed that he threatened to hire a hitman to murder her and that he'd make it look like a botched robbery. On the day of the shooting, Rebekah saw her husband on the phone and thought he was finally setting it up. So in response, she grabbed a gun and fired. In the end, Rebekah agreed to a plea deal and was found guilty of second-degree murder. As a result, she was sentenced to at least 20 years behind bars. This punishment didn't do much to ease the minds of the dead man's family, who complained that she should get a harsher sentence. The victim's family and the state asked the judge to issue the maximum sentence of 22 years, while Rebekah's family pushed for the minimum sentence, 18 years. And so, to compromise, Judge Pamela Gates issued a sentence down the middle, handing her 20 years instead. Number 7. Airport Shooter. Esteban Santiago was sentenced to life in prison back in 2018 for a shooting in the Fort Lauderdale airport. Because of him, 5 people lost their lives. At the man's sentencing hearing, U.S. District Judge Beth Bloom described Santiago's attack as 85 seconds of evil. The defendant accepted a plea deal, ultimately admitting guilt on 11 total charges in exchange for not getting the death penalty. Because the shooting happened inside an international civilian airport, Santiago faced federal charges. The suspect was originally living in Anchorage, Alaska, when he decided to fly into Fort Lauderdale with a checked gun in his luggage. According to authorities, he followed the Transportation Security Administration's protocols for checking the weapon, so nobody suspected him of being a threat. When he landed, Santiago picked up his bag and went to the bathroom where he loaded the gun. Then, he immediately opened fire in the baggage claim area. Apparently, Santiago had a long history of mental health problems. He served in the National Guard in Alaska and Puerto Rico, and was even deployed to Iraq in 2010 and 2011. But in August 2016, he was discharged for poor performance. That same year, Santiago allegedly visited an FBI office where he claimed his mind was being controlled by some kind of intelligence agency. His behavior was erratic, but they didn't believe he could harm anyone, so he was referred to a medical facility where he underwent evaluation. After his FBI visit, the man's gun was briefly taken from him, only to be given back in December 2016. Unfortunately, just 1 month later, Santiago carried out the deadly shooting in Fort Lauderdale. As a result, 5 people were killed and 6 others were injured. It wasn't until after the shooting that Santiago was officially diagnosed with schizophrenia, which explains his delusions and erratic behavior. Number 6. Off his meds. In 2007, 51-year-old Timothy Crook killed his elderly parents and buried them in a garden in Lincoln, England. The murders were absolutely brutal. Timothy strangled 83-year-old Roger Cook and his wife, 76-year-old Elsie, with a belt and also punched, kicked, and stomped on the old couple. Timothy, who suffers from paranoid schizophrenia, then moved the bodies 150 miles to Lincoln, where he hid them in an overgrown property. He dumped a suitcase full of his grandparents' clothes next to the remains and put several wheelie bins on top of where they were buried to hide them. Afterward, Timothy dumped his car nearby before catching 3 trains back to the home he shared with the victims in Swindon, Wiltshire. To hide what he'd done, he lied to family and friends about Roger and Elsie's whereabouts, claiming that they'd gone to try and sell his house for him. Luckily, though, their bodies were found on July 11, 2007. Timothy was arrested on suspicion of murder, but he was initially found unfit to enter a plea. But after improving his health, he was put on trial for 2 counts of murder and was found guilty of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. In the end, he was handed life behind bars with a minimum sentence of 16 years. Unfortunately, it's unclear what led to the unprovoked attack, but Timothy suffered from delusions that the United States was after him. It's possible that his grandparents got caught up in some twisted scenario his brain forced him to play out. It's also believed that his schizophrenia stemmed from his previous job working for the Ministry of Defense. Number 5. Charles BYRNE. In early 2022, a 28-year-old Filipina model was killed at her house in Worcester by her mentally unstable ex-boyfriend. The incident happened during one of his paranoid delusions. 25-year-old Charles BYRNE believed that his ex, Christina Rowe, was a reskinned male pedophile. What's worse is that right before everything happened, the model's family warned her to be careful around BYRNE, who had a history of violence and was controlling. It's unclear if the pair were simply hanging out, or if BYRNE showed up unannounced to the home, where he brutally killed Christina and stuffed her body into a suitcase before trying to murder the woman's child as well. After strangling and stabbing his ex, he tried to do the same to her daughter. While the young girl was unconscious, BYRNE moved the suitcase with Christina's remains to his mother's car. He then drove to the River Severn near Diglis Bridge and dumped her into the water. It was later revealed that BYRNE was stalking Christina, and a few days before the murder, he'd even kidnapped her and her child. But after holding them against their will for a few hours, he released them. For some reason, he was never convicted for this. If he was, the murder probably could have been avoided. Whether BYRNE was in the right state of mind or not, he was still responsible for ending Christina Rowe's life. As a result, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 16 years. Number 4. LARON Smith. In November 2019, a man's erratic behavior left him banned by airline officials from taking his connecting flight from Chicago to Arizona. LARON Smith, who was 22 years old at the time, believed that he was being kidnapped and thought he was going to be sent to China. For this reason, the airline didn't think he should fly. Since he wasn't able to get on his designated flight, he returned to Pittsburgh, where he was staying with his mom, Lana Johnson. After the incident at the airport, Smith started isolating himself from his family and stopped taking care of himself completely. His mother reportedly found several water bottles filled with urine inside the home's fireplace, which is when they finally knew something wasn't right with Smith. Afterward, Lana made an appointment for her son to get mental health treatment, but by then, it was already too late. The day before his appointment, Smith killed his neighbor, Ernest Mills Jr. in Brighton Heights. On that same afternoon, a witness claimed that they saw Smith yelling profanities at himself outside before he put on a ski mask and grabbed a gun. He then followed Ernest and his girlfriend as they got a pizza. Near the intersection of Davis Avenue and Brighton Road, Smith shot and killed Ernest. 2 days later, he was arrested. He pleaded guilty but mentally ill to the third-degree murder charge before Judge Anthony M. Mariani. Smith was eventually sentenced to 16.5 to 43 years behind bars, but he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and ended up spending some time at Torrance State Hospital, where he was put on medication to help with his severe symptoms. Number 3. Severed head. In 2021, a paranoid schizophrenic woman decapitated her brother and put his severed head in her wardrobe at her North London apartment. In February 2021, 41-year-old Heaven Bilal moved to London from Plymouth to be closer to her older brother, 46-year-old Omar Bilal. But things took a deadly turn in July when police were sent to her home. An emergency call had been placed by cornered social workers after one of the woman's neighbors heard some screaming. But what wasn't known to the responding officers was that Heaven had placed the call herself. She apparently told the dispatcher, "It's me, Samuel the Lord," while referencing an Old Testament prophet. When the police got there, they forced their way into the apartment and discovered a man's lifeless body at the top of the stairs. The corpse's upper half was covered in garbage bags, and when they were taken off, they noticed that the man's head was gone. The victim also suffered several stab wounds to his chest and was later identified as Omar Bilal. Officers searched the rest of the home and found the man's decapitated head inside a plastic carrier bag in a bedroom wardrobe. Heaven, who seemed calm but wore blood-stained pants and shoes, was arrested on suspicion of murder. It was later determined that the horrific murder was carried out while she was in the grip of a very serious mental illness. And according to prosecutor William Emlyn Jones KC, everyone involved in the case agreed that the murder was explained by her illness. Psychiatrists that performed mental evaluations on Heaven came to the conclusion that during the murder, she was going through delusions and was unaware that her actions were wrong. And when jurors made the decision on whether or not she was guilty, they decided that by reason of insanity, she wasn't. As a result, Judge Anthony Leonard gave her a hospital order without a time limit. Hopefully, she'll get the treatment she needs and can learn to heal from the horrific things she's done. Number 2. LSD abuse. Dryden, New York resident Justin Barkley fatally shot a man outside of an Ithaca Walmart in December 2016 and blamed it on months of LSD abuse. According to the Ithaca Journal, Barkley initially thought he'd been drugged before the shooting, and he believed that his delusions led to the violent actions. While pleading guilty to menacing a police officer and first-degree manslaughter, Barkley told the judge that he thought his psychosis was induced by liquid LSD that was put in his home, not by him, but by individuals that apparently had resentments and grievances toward him. While Barkley was supposedly under the influence of the hallucinogenic drug for several months, he was arrested in August 2016 for attacking someone for no reason at all. Eventually, his bizarre behavior caused him to be hospitalized. Then, in December of that year, he killed Candor resident William Schumacher in a state of paranoia. He thought the UPS driver was from the government or was one of the 4 people he suspected of drugging him, so he convinced himself that Schumacher needed to be taken care of. He then grabbed his rifle from the back of his truck and fired a kill shot at the innocent man. After an almost 8-hour standoff with police, he surrendered and was arrested. In the end, he got a 25-year sentence and was handed 5 years of post-release supervision as well. Number 1. Jay Clark. In April 2020, 35-year-old Jay Clark wrongly thought that his girlfriend, 33-year-old Colin Hunter, was cheating on him, so he stabbed her over 30 times at their shared home in Enfield, North London. Colin suffered multiple stab and slash wounds to her body, face, and head, and her throat had also been cut into. Police were called to the scene by the couple's neighbor, Greg Ainsworth, who broke down the door to the home to try and help. When law enforcement arrived, Colin was transported to the hospital by helicopter, where surgeons miraculously managed to save her. It was later revealed that Colin was trying to get out of the toxic relationship with Clark in the days leading up to the attack. This caused Clark to believe the woman was being unfaithful to him, which wasn't the first time he doubted a partner's loyalty. He denied the charge of attempted murder in court, but was convicted by the jury. As a result, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum serving time of 14 years. If someone you knew hurt your child during an altered state of consciousness due to their paranoid schizophrenia, would you cut them out of your life, or would you try to help them? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Bad Badger.